I think a lot of people's sort of Twitter journey starts that way. You create an account, you let it dormant for a few years, and all of a sudden, you figure out, what's the right way to kind of use it, or at least the right way you think it should be used for. So, no, absolutely. So in that sense, from an as an academic, how do you think this has been useful to you in your career journey? And I mean, if you say you've been using it since 2017, so it's been roughly 6-7 years while you have been on Twitter. And how have you seen that impact, let's say, your academic journey or your career in both good ways and bad?
Yeah, I mean, my experience on there has probably been a little bit out of the ordinary, but it's had such a profound impact on my career. And, some of that is maybe unique to me or to the career stage that I was at, but I really can't imagine my life or career had I not gotten to do that, right? So many opportunities to be able to be interviewed about science, or to be able to write, about professional development in different magazines, things like meeting Krishna and being able to be here talking to you all, right? Had I not been on Twitter, well, obviously I wouldn't be here talking about social media, but, I'm just as often on a webinar or a seminar talking about mentoring or professional development or career paths or all of these different topics. And I don't know how much of that would have happened without Twitter. And I think about when I travel to different cities, all of the different people I know, and I think, oh my goodness, like we wouldn't be friends without Twitter. And that's really pretty incredible. I think at the end of the day, the relationships have been by far the best part of it. There's definitely downsides as well. I think, if you're just posting about science, it's a lot safer because it's in some ways less controversial, or the people who are going to come and care about anyways, someone who's anti-science is going to show up and, be saying bad things to you because you're talking about science. That's not really something that any of us would concern ourselves too much with. But something I do see is that people who are talking about topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion, there can be a lot of, positive and negative and different responses to that. And so it's, there can be some difficult things if you're tackling those topics. But on the flip side of that, again, I will say that Twitter has taught me an important lesson of you can't make everyone happy all of the time. If you're doing anything important, then there will be, if you're trying to create any sort of change, then there will always be people who are unhappy. And that's a really, really important leadership lesson. So for everyone here, if you're a faculty member, an independent investigator, if you're a grad student or postdoc, then you're going to be in some sort of an independent leadership position eventually, be that in industry or academia or government or wherever. And leadership is not about being popular or having everyone like you all the time. It's about having a set of values, trying to do what's best for your institution, for your department, for your team, and living out your set of values. And when that leads to you having to do something that's not necessarily universally popular, that's part of leadership. And so social media can almost be a kind of a good way to learn how to be okay with that.
Absolutely. No, that's something that I have found out as well. Interesting that you mentioned values. And one of the interesting learnings for me personally has been how it has clarified my stand on a whole bunch of different things. When you hear pros and cons of an argument being said out to you in 140 or 280 characters, then you really get to sort of better sense of where you stand on a whole lot of different things. So,
yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, I totally agree with that. And it really is, I think, the forefront of dialogue around, especially around diversity, equity, inclusion, because so much of learning how to do that well, obviously there's a lot of evidence-based practices and social science behind it, But a lot of it is empathy. It's being able to be aware of the vast diversity of lived experiences that people have and developing an empathy to understand, oh, how might this person feel in this situation, or how might this person interpret this thing that happened. And social media is just such a rich place to be able to learn about the lived experiences of people from all around the world and all sorts of different contexts. And even just the dialogue of being at the forefront. Like I remember a time when I was thinking about pronouns. It's like, it's like a while ago, because now we actually do this more readily. Is like, why don't we just like have our pronouns printed on our name badges when we go to conferences? And someone actually said, well, actually, that wouldn't be quite the best, because they might change from when you register for the conference to when you show up. And so it's actually better to have like stickers. You can kind of choose wherever you're at that day. And I was like, oh, that's like a really, I wouldn't have thought about that. And then being able to have that dialogue, helped me to learn something new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, from a leadership perspective, like you said, and I think all of us know that you've sort of advocated for a whole bunch of things, and we know about your stance on a lot of mentoring issues, on how academia should be like, and how it is kind of diverging from the ideal that it was supposed to or have been like. But from a more professional perspective, right? I mean, there's this one leadership sort of a track, if you will, of being on social media, and more from a research perspective. So you mentioned relationships. You mentioned being able to empathize more about, having to or having heard about people's lived experiences. So that helps you grow as an individual, right? But what about as a scientist? Something that you do professionally, has being on Twitter and other types of social media sort of helped you grow as a scientist as well?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And, I think it's a really important one, because not everyone is as passionate about that other side of Twitter. And so I always say, like, even if you don't care about any of the academic culture, you don't want to talk about that on social media. I mean, I think most people care about it, but if you don't want to talk about that on social media, there is still an argument, a very strong argument, to be on Twitter as a scientist. And I think that that's twofold. Both to see science and promote the science that you do, and then also for science communication for those who are interested in that. And the seeing and promoting science, I think that just social media keeps getting more and more important in that every year, because, the more and more we're going, journal publication times are very long, right, and kind of unwieldy. But preprint servers are a fantastic way to get your research out. But right, when you put something on a preprint server, it's just going into, Chem Archive or BioArchive. And I don't know that too many people have the bandwidth to go and like be looking at every single thing that's posting on the Chem Archive to see if there's something they want to read. So instead, we need something that curates, that helps get the word out about these preprints when they come out. And Twitter has seemed to be the best way for that to happen. And so I think I have valued significantly, both from, just seeing research, seeing people post about like, hey, our newest preprint is out, check out the latest research. And I'm seeing what's happening at the forefront of the field. But also when you do a preprint, really the whole point is to get the word out early and to establish that you were the person who published that first, or to make people aware of it before it comes out in the journal. And so really you could argue that the value of your preprint is only as good as the number of people who see it. And so unless you have a good way to promote that and bring attention to it, it really loses a lot of the value of having put it out there early in the literature. And so social media, it's not the only way, but it's a really, really good way to be able to share information about these early reports that are coming out. And then, that's for people as a researcher. And then for, the people who want to be active in science communication, it's just a fantastic place to go and to do science communication and to be able to share it's also a really good way to get noticed for interviews for science communication. So I think every time I've been interviewed for some sort of a media article about, COVID or a government shutdown and the impact on science, it's been because I've posted something on Twitter about it, and then a reporter will reach out to me or journalist will reach out and say, oh, I saw your post on Twitter. Would you be willing to talk more about this? And so for those people, it's the way to get noticed and get those opportunities.
No, that's very, very true. One sort of good thing that I like about Twitter is the word limit, which essentially helps you make sure that whatever it is that you want to say, you have to be absolutely crystal clear of what you want to say in those 140 or 280 characters, because I'm pretty sure you have found that out on your own as well, is that there is very little room for nuance in a tweet, right? So if you say something, you better word it exactly right, rather than having to start a Twitter storm that you will end up sort of your days and nights defending something, which is different from what you wanted to convey in the first place.
Yeah.
And just because you did not word it correctly, you just ended up saying something maybe similar, but not as nuanced. And then all of a sudden, you have all of these people behind you for saying something or the other. So I kind of like that, which is, I'm going to make sure that I write exactly what it is that I mean. So that's one. The other thing that I really like, the other point that you sort of mentioned, was around just following literature. So these days, there is, at least in computer science, there is so much happening that there is no way I, or even a smallish research group that we have, can be on top of anything, right? So I kind of just depend on these threads to do my literature survey. I mean, to an extent, I don't know how that's coming out when I actually say it out loud, but
no, I think it's a fair point, right? That the days of, I think about when I started my career, there were like 12 journals that I got notifications every day of every paper that came out in those 12 journals. And as long as I looked at that, I wasn't missing much. And now that's just impossible. And so I think a fair way to think about it, what I hear you saying is you need multiple, this patchwork of, I saw it on Twitter, I saw it in my notifications, someone in my group saw it, a collaborator saw it, and all of these different, and you pull together this patchwork, and it's still not perfect, but at least you get, very little can slip by that's really, really important. That.
No, absolutely. So I think there's some
questions, Manu.
questions coming in. Yes. So let me
starting with
just go up
Annapurna,
and
right on top.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
All right. So there's a question from Annapurna, and I'll just read it as is. Annapurna says, we see several examples of folks who do pretty well without any social media presence, especially in research. How does one communicate to early career researchers in such an environment that social media can have a lot of benefits?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that there's a lot of things in academia. There's a lot of choices you can make, and each of them has advantages and also costs to it, right? That there's advantages to being on social media, but then the downside can be, it can take some time. Though I always say, people who are worried about how much time it can take, you're the one who gets to control that. It's kind of a wrestling match with the psychologists who work at all of these companies that, they're trying to control us and control when and how we use these platforms. But at the end of the day, we are the ones who get to control that. We can control how much time we will spend there. We can control, to some extent, what we're going to see by who we follow and what we like. The algorithms don't give us things that we don't want to see. And so if, depending on who you're following and what you're liking, that's going to, kind of control what's showing up in your feed. Although I know Twitter, the algorithm is sometimes broken in this, days when it's a little bit of a hollowed out shell of itself. But generally still, if I open up my Twitter right now, it's just like some science, some really cool science. It's people talking about mentoring and things like that. It's a ton of people celebrating good things that have happened to them. and that's, what I've cultivated on there. So I think that, there's good and bad to everything. You can certainly be successful without it. There's a lot of things in academia that can be good to do, but aren't, but then you can always find people who are successful without it. So I think it's just deciding, are the advantages worth the drawbacks? Is it worth your time and, the risk, as Manu said, of you might say something that doesn't come across quite right? Is that worth what you might get out of it in terms of networking or the ability to publicize your science? And I think that can change over time as well. I've talked with a number of people who have said that there was a time in their career when Twitter was just a complete lifeline, because where they were working at the time, they didn't have those people that they could relate to. They didn't have people who shared their identities or who shared their life experiences or who were thinking about and talking about the same things that they were. But then as they moved to a different career stage, then they had those people and they thought, oh, well, I don't really, rely on this community as much in order to fill that part of my life. I mean, I'll say that I haven't been as active on Twitter, and part of that is just that this department chair job keeps me pretty busy, and so I don't have as much time for it. Part of it is that it's just hard to be there with what it's become under the new leadership over the last year. And part of it too is that I'm actually just in a much, much happier place in my career this last year and a half since I moved. And so I don't have as much of a need for, I don't want to say I don't have a need for the community, because it's such a wonderful, wonderful community. I can balance that. I now have that community in real life in ways that are much more prolific than I did before. And so I had a little bit of that in real life before, and now I have a lot more. And so it's just then the balance can shift a little bit of where I'm turning to for my networking and for those conversations.
No, that's a good point. And sort of to add a little bit of context. So in my academic career, I have sort of worked only with institutions that are new or that are just coming up. And the computer science community in India itself is relatively smallish, right? So one of the things that I kind of got out of Twitter specifically was being able to project to the outside world what I was doing, because I did not have that network in India to sort of promote my research, hire faculty, hire staff, hire students. So that way, just out there and having being noticed, for the lack of a better word, just sort of helped out professionally in that sense. So if
have you seen?
Sure.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, have you seen how you use Twitter, like how often, but also the type of content and the way you use it? Has that's changed throughout your career as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, earlier it was more, I started out on Twitter mostly for sort of promoting a workshop that we were doing. This was 2017, around that time, 2017, 2018. And then people said, well, you'd be able to get participants if you promote on Twitter. That's a great place to be. And that's how I started out. And then I realized, well, okay, like you said, I mean, I can almost see parallels to your journey with mine on Twitter, which is essentially, you can build a community. There are people out there who want to talk, but they can't sort of either schedule calls or, this is a much better way of just starting a conversation that way. So community building is how I started out. And then it shifted towards mentoring, which was, there are a lot of resources for students out in the West, in Europe, in US, but there is no specific advice that people can get specifically for the Indian context. How do I go look for faculty jobs? How do I go search for a postdoc? I want to apply for a PhD. How do I get
your
started?
Posts on all of that are so fantastic, by the way.
Thank you. So I mean, again, it just, like you said, it is essentially you have to be a little bit clear about what it is that you want out of this
But
space.
how did memes start? What was the inspiration for that?
Oh,
Just kind of like I have a thought and I need to share it. And
yeah, that's pretty much my sort of ranting outlet. You know, I could either go out and just say something which probably is true, but it would just it's like shouting in a forest, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. But if I say it in a way in which it might get noticed to the extent that it would reach whoever is responsible for making that change, then
mhm,
that's probably worth it, right?
yeah.
So, and I know a little bit of Bollywood. I like enjoying. I enjoy Hindi films, and then somehow I just made the connection in my head that I have a meme for a situation. So once you start looking out for things, and then things happen, there's like, oh, okay, I know. There's a GIF for that. There's a meme for that. So yes, I mean that's how academy meme started, and now I find like situations to fit things on everywhere I look. I find something onto which I can fit a gif or a meme or something of that
Mhm.
sort. And we have, believe me, in the Indian ecosystem, we have a lot of issues that can be represented by, or a lot of problems that can be represented by Bollywood memes. But anyways, a lot of new questions here. Let me not
Yes, yes,
get carried
Manu.
away.
No, let me help you,
um
Manu. After Annapurna's
sure.
question, it was Parvez Dar
Yes.
about striking a
Yes.
balance. You got the question, Manu?
Got it. Got it.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
okay.
where I am. Thank you.
Hmm.
So Parvez asks how to strike balance between leveraging social media for professional growth and
Mm.
maintaining work-life balance in this age of constant connectivity.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it's deciding on limits and then sticking to those is really important. So, there's different ways to do that depending on what your day looks like or just your preferences. And I think that this goes for just about anything, right? It all comes down to a bigger question of how we organize our time. And so, if you have a relatively open-ended schedule for your day, say if you're a graduate student and your schedule might look like, you have a meeting or you might have some instrument time booked, but then you just have a big block of time for research, it can be easy to kind of fall down that, rabbit hole of like, oh, I'll just check social media for 5 minutes. And then like an hour later, you look up and you're like, oh my goodness, where did the time go? So I think in that case, it might be helpful to, I tell my group members this, and I felt this. Well, we didn't actually have social media when I was a grad student. I think like when I was finishing I'm going to show how old I am. When I was finishing grad school, like MySpace was just becoming a thing. And so I didn't really have to worry about this. But maybe during my postdoc, Facebook was starting to come about. And so it's like setting a timer. Just say, okay, I'm going to check social media really quick, but I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes. And then as soon as that goes off, I'm going to put it down and I'm going to go back to whatever I was doing. So that can be a really good strategy if your day is relatively unstructured and it might be easy to spend more time than you want. If you have a fairly structured day and you have, if you're a faculty member and you have classes and you have committee meetings, all of these things, then I think just deciding when you're going to use it can be a good way to go about it. So for me, it's Twitter is the first thing to go when I have a busy day. It's like if I'm busy, then Twitter immediately just falls off my radar, and it's the first thing to not exist. Um, and if I have time, I might check it in between meetings. If I say, oh, I have 5 minutes, or I'm walking across campus, I'll open up, or I'm waiting for someone, to start a meeting. I'll say, oh, I'll chat for like 2 or 3 minutes. Or at night, I might scroll through as I'm falling asleep. But if I determine the times that I will use it, then that tends to keep it pretty contained, how much I will or won't use it. And if at some point I just realize like, wow, I'm on here a lot more than I want to be, then I just take a break from it and say, okay, I'm just not going to use it for a while.
Very interesting. Do you have any thoughts on using Twitter on the phone versus using it on the computer? And do you prefer one or the other when you're trying to sort of get off of it?
Oh,
Something?
that's a great question. I mostly use it on my phone or, on my iPad as I'm, getting ready to fall asleep or whatever. I will say the one time it's really nice to use it on the computer. There's especially with the technological hurdles they have now, there's like little different vagaries of what works and what doesn't on the different platforms. The one time I found the computer is really, really nice is if I'm during COVID when I was doing more like science communication threads and things like that. So if you're doing a thread, then what I prefer, the Twitter like way to set that up, I find to be really unwieldy. And so I actually like to write it out in a Word doc, because then I can be always like using this whatever word count to check the number of characters, and I'll get it all written out in the Word doc, and then I'll just go through and cut and paste. And then that's way, way easier to do on a computer than on a phone.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, here's another question that I personally would also like to hear your views on, which is from Arushi, I think. How do you avoid trolls or pitfalls of social media not relating to you personally?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'll say, you can't avoid trolls altogether. And so I think, the person asking that definitely recognizes that. Although I will say, if you can't avoid the random trolls and bots and all of those things, but if someone is, something it took me a while to realize was okay, is if someone is trolling you on a regular basis, you can block them. Like I would have people where no matter what I post, they would just show up and make some snarky comment about it. And I was like, I just don't need this. And even more importantly, the people who are showing up then to have dialogue about the things I'm posting, I don't want them to have that as well. And so actually one of the first rules I had is if I posted something and someone just made a mean comment, I wouldn't necessarily do anything. But then if someone had made a comment, like a genuine comment in response to my post, and then someone shows up and says something mean to them, instantly I block someone. If you're trolling the people that I'm trying to have conversations with, like you're out. Like absolutely, I want people to be able to have a safe space for dialogue, and if that's not happening, then gone. But you can't completely avoid it, and I think it's a microcosm of this messy world we live in. And so while I wish that there were less of that, it has been instructive, and it has been useful for, in real life. Again, if you're in a leadership position in real life, there are trolls there as well. And you have to learn how to, it's been a really hard lesson. This is so hard for me because I'm a people pleaser, but there's a lot of value in learning how to say, I've done my best. I've lived out my values. I'm trying to do what's best for this whole group of people, or, try to say this in the best possible way. And if that's not good enough for someone, if I've done my best and that's not good enough, and I've come in, I know I have good intentions and I'm sticking to my values, and if that's still not good enough, then I can still sleep at night. And I have to be okay with that and say, yeah, not everyone's going to like everything that you do. And, that's just a rule of leadership. I mean, if you look at the people who have the most influence and the most impact, you can always find people who, even at that level of those people who are so tremendous, there's always people who don't like what they're doing. And if they let that stop them, then they wouldn't have that impact. And so it's good and bad. I mean, I know that there's some questions about alternative platforms as well. And it's something I think about a lot. I don't know that there is one that is compelling enough to make the leap yet, but I know a lot of people talk about LinkedIn maybe being, and as I think about that, it's appealing in the sense that I think that there's far less trolling that goes on there. But then on the downside, it's really only the professional circle. I don't have the ability to post something that, someone's parent might see, or that someone who's not in my scientific field or not in academia. You certainly have a broad network there as well, but it's definitely not nearly as diverse of a community as you might find on Twitter. But there would probably be less trolling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thought I thought I developed a thick skin after or during my PhD, but then being on Twitter, sort of, you realize that there are gradations to that thickness.
The grant and manuscript reviews hurt a lot less now that I've gotten used to Twitter.
I know.
I'm like, after people show up and say all those things to me, like, that grant reviewer, that's nothing. Like, you got nothing on me.
Absolutely. It only took me 3 years to publish that paper, but I've handled Twitter trolls for like 5 years now, so that's okay. But anyways, there are a lot of more interesting questions. So Rudra asked, and I'm going to paraphrase this question a little bit. Does being on social media help with interpersonal skills as well? So for example, he asks, well, there are situations in which you would want to publish something on social media regarding, let's say, research, but your collaborators or co-authors might not want to do that for whatever reason. How do you handle those situations? I mean, is there a lesson in interpersonal relationships there somewhere?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I think a good practice is that if your post involves other people, to always just talk to them about it first and make sure that they're okay with it. And so I actually was giving a talk on social media not too long ago at University of Nebraska Medical Center, and a really great question came up there it was from a graduate student saying, when we make a silly mistake in the lab, we kind of like to be able to post about those because then that helps normalize that it's okay to make mistakes. It also might just give someone a good laugh that day that they might need it. And I thought that's so good, right? Because that is one of the ways that we do come together in really, really powerful ways on social media. But they said, I'm worried about, the reputation for the lab or maybe for that person. And so we talked a little bit about how you can do that in a way that is okay. And I think part of that is just anytime you're going to mention someone else or show a picture of them or tell their story in a way that identifies them, to always, always, always make sure that they're okay with it. And even, and then also to anonymize whenever is possible, right? It's like you can, take a photo of, the classic one in my field of organic chemistry. Actually, I think someone posted this. I had an assignment in my class once actually to normalize failure where students it was a lab class, and students got extra credit if they made social media posts about their failures. And someone posted a picture of a separatory funnel with the stopcock open, because that's like the classic mistake. And they were like, we had just one task, to close the stopcock on the separatory funnel. And, and then it shows the separatory funnel like a, puddle underneath it or whatever. And so I think there's ways to do that. Whatever you want to do, you can do it in a way that you check in with people, make sure they're okay with it, and then, do it in a way that everyone is happy with. But it's a wonderful question. And I think that is so important.
Nice. Okay, so there is another one from Chandrama, which is also, again, very interesting. And I'd like to hear your answer on this is, do Twitter posts push you to have more of an imposter syndrome, or being on Twitter for that matter?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think it definitely can. I think a lot of that depends on what you cultivate as your experience. And again, the algorithm is a little bit broken right now, so you can't totally control this. But I actually had a really interesting conversation with a colleague one day where he said, we were talking about Twitter, and this was a couple of years ago, and he said, yeah, I think I have to get off of Twitter for a little bit because all I see is everyone just bragging about how amazing they are and all of the different things that they're doing. And it just makes me feel inadequate. And I was like, oh, like that's really interesting, because my Twitter feed is just everyone talking about our insecurities and failures and all the things that we do wrong and struggle with. And so I think that can go either way. Some of that is what you cultivate, and some of that is what you let in. I think that the things that can drive imposter syndrome, that's everywhere. And we need to develop ways to defend ourselves against that, to say, oh, yes, that person in my department or whatever is talking about how they can write a manuscript in 2 hours, and I feel like a failure because I can't do that, right? Like those people are always going to be out there. There was one that went around for a while. It was during COVID. It was very poorly done, of like, oh, during COVID lockdown, I got this done and this done and this done and this done. And like everybody who had young kids was like, go away right now, please. Like I got absolutely nothing done. sat in on this many homeschool classes. I did this many 5th grade math assignments. But I didn't get any work done at all during those first weeks. And so I think that's always going to be out there, and it's always just going to be a part of life. On social media, it's a little bit more focused and in your face. And so I think that there's definitely a place for trying to cultivate your experience away from that. But also, if you recognize that, wow, yeah, being on here, it's just making it all that much harder to defend myself against kind of these things that promote imposter syndrome, then it's a good time to take a break from social media as well.
No, that's a good point. And I think one of the things that sort of helped me looking at various posts from various scientists was developing this sense of that everybody is sort of struggling through the same set of things that I am going through, right? So it's not just me, because when I was doing my PhD, I at least used to feel every once in a while that, oh, this is just happening to me and it's not happening to everybody else. Yeah. But then, or maybe you had one friend who you could actually talk to and they were going through the exact same thing. But now you have like millions of people who are going through the exact same thing. So there's this sense of bonding or sense of just I don't know, a community that, it's not just you, it's a lot of people who are sort of going through the exact same struggle as an academic, as a PhD student, as a postdoctoral fellow that you are potentially going through. And once you see that those people have somehow gotten over the hump, right? I mean, they struggled through what it is that they had to struggle through, and now that they're in a better place, that sort of like, gives you hope. It's like silver lining at the end of the tunnel. So that's always nice.
As you were saying that, you're exactly right on that. And it's so interesting how all these things happen in our real life, and then they can also happen on social media, right? That if you're struggling in grad school, you might have the opportunity to go in and talk to your lab mate, and they say, oh yeah, I struggled with that as well. And maybe one way to think about it is that this is not unique, but a good way to frame it is that social media, it's all of the good and bad that we all have in our real life and all of humanity, but just in this focused, like highly concentrated sort of way. And so it just is a lot more intense, and that can be really good because you can have, a tremendous level of support or people to relate to, but it can also be really bad. And that it can also be this like overwhelming onslaught of, if you're struggling and you go on and in real life, you might go and someone had a paper accepted and you're like, good for you, but I'm having a rough day. You can go on social media and be like, oh, I just saw 50 people who are all having the best day of their life and I'm having the worst day of my life. And that's really hard. But also on the flip side, you might see 50 people who can all relate to the struggle you're having and help you feel better about it.
Right. This is a great question again from Arushi. Do you feel the need to be actively posting now that you're popular? Or do you, and again, there's a second part to it, but I'll get to that later.
Oh, wow, that is do I feel the need to be posting is a really, it's an interesting question. It carries a lot of emotion for me. I will say that it's somewhere where I need to follow my own advice. I sometimes do feel like I have to keep posting. But then I always tell people, like, you control your experience. If you want to be on social media, be on social media. If you decide it's not healthy for you for a time, don't be on social media. I will say that there was a time when, in the not too distant past, that I didn't really want to be on there. It was a really tough place to be. And I just was not at a really great time in my life because of a lot of things that were happening around me. But I felt like if I stepped away from it, then there was one particular person who's trying to make, I was dealing with bullying and harassment and stuff. And one of the goals of that person was to media. And so I'm a competitive person. So I was like, well, I don't really want to be on here, but I don't want to quit because then they win, right? And so that's something I feel right now. I've been a lot less active in the last year. And again, part of that was the move and a new job and Twitter being kind of a mess. But also some of that was saying, there was a time when I didn't really want to be on here and I felt like I still had to, and my heart wasn't in it, but I still wanted to show up and keep posting. And so maybe now is the time I get to give myself that, even though I'm in a really good place in my life and in a really good workplace, and not dealing with that situation anymore, I can give myself a little bit of a vacation or break from it and not feel like I have to post. But yeah, sometimes, and again, it's a good leadership lesson of there are people out there who might say, oh, you owe it to people to be doing XYZ posting. It's like, no. You don't owe anyone on social media anything, no one does. It's your time. And I always say at the end of your career or at the end of your life, I don't think I'm going to be, laying in the hospital thinking, boy, I really regret that I didn't make that person on social media happy, that I don't even know, that isn't even part of my real life, that they expected this of me and I wasn't able to do it. And so I think, don't try to make people unhappy, but it's just thinking about you can't make everyone happy and you have to do what's right for you. And especially importantly for your closest friends and family. And if that's balancing your time so that you can spend more time with family, so you can be present and not distracted by social media, then that's, at least for me, the thing to prioritize.
No, absolutely. I mean, in the last month and a half or so, I was very inactive on Twitter. And I agree to some extent, if you've been sort of interacting with people on there for a while, then for a few days, it feels like you're missing out, right? But if there are other things that you have to take care of, then it's completely fine to be away for a bit, because every once in a while you get into these sort of, even after trying the level best, you get into these arguments which become heated, right? I mean, there's a very nice XKCD comic on, I don't know if people know XKCD, but there's a very nice XKCD comic.
is so good.
Right? There's this one guy sitting on a laptop in the middle of the night, and the wife's calling him from bed saying, honey, come to bed. It's late at night. And the guy's like, no, somebody's wrong on the internet. So I have to make sure that person is corrected. And every time I want to write something, which I otherwise wouldn't, which sort of comes out as mean or whatever, I always go back to that XKCD comic, which is essentially, especially given that I or anybody on Twitter has 280 characters, there is very, very little chance that you'd be able to sort of change somebody's mind. The best you could potentially do is say what you feel and put it out there to the best of your ability with all the nuance that you potentially can. But that's it. If you set out with the explicit goal of being able to sort of convince somebody or change somebody else's behavior, then that person is not going to change, most likely. And it's going to be really, really hard on yourself, because then you'd be kicking yourself saying, oh, I was not able to change that person's behavior. I mean, it was not going to happen in the first place. Oh, why are you bothering? So, I mean, that has been sort of like a guiding light for me when I'm kind of interacting on Twitter, because, and every once in a while I would find somebody that, I become that pig who wants to wrestle in the mud for whatever reason. And that happens once every 6 months, but I try to avoid it as much as I can.
I know that XKCD comic, and that's such a good one. And you probably saw the Twitter post too. It was a couple of years ago, but it went viral. But one of my favorite Twitter posts ever is where someone said, they're like, nice little Twitter post you got there. Wouldn't it be a shame if someone showed up and interpreted it in the least charitable possible way?
Right.
That really resonated. I thought that was so good, right?
Absolutely. So before we run out of time, let me just ask Arushi's second part of the question, which is, do you feel that your opinions are always awaited or judged on Twitter?
That they're always what? I'm sorry, judged or?
Yes. Do you feel like people are waiting for you to post something? And then do you think there is a section of people who sort of judge everything that you post?
That That's a great question. Well, I don't think anyone is waiting for me to post stuff because I don't think that anything I say is nearly important enough that anyone is waiting. I think, if I post and people happen to see it, maybe it might resonate with them. But judging it, there are definitely, well, there have been people who, early in my time on Twitter, there were people where no matter what I posted, they would just show up and post something mean-spirited about it. It's like I could post, boy, the sun is shining and it's a beautiful day today, and they would show up and find a way to say something mean about that. And so I largely cultivated, and finally, like after 200 times of this happening, it's like, okay, I am allowed to block that person. And so I don't see that so much, but there definitely are, especially there's a few topics, like whenever I post something about, like, there's more to life than your CV, like, yes, even if I say publications are important, but like at the end of your life, my H index is not going to be engraved on my tombstone or whatever. I'm not going to care about my H index. Anytime I post something like that, there's two people in particular, without fail, who will show up and write some long thread about, like, you're misleading early career researchers, and if you want to be successful, you need to know that it takes hard work and all of this stuff. And it's like, and then there'll be people who are like, well, if you actually go and read what the post said, she doesn't say that. She doesn't say you shouldn't work hard. So that's probably the closest example I know is that, almost without fail, if I say something about work-life balance that's getting a lot of attention, then there's those couple of people who will show up and just talk about how, well, fine, they'll say, essentially they're saying you can have work-life balance, but then you need to, realize you're not going to be successful. And I usually just don't respond. It's so continuous that it's not worth it. One of the most insightful things I've ever heard for navigating social media, someone said, the easiest way for people to get attention is to find the thing that's getting attention and then start tearing it down. And I just always think of that. And, it's people who don't maybe want to create something positive themselves, but they want to get attention. The easiest way that they'll do this is trolling, right? They'll show up, find whatever is popular, and then try and tear it down. And that's, if you realizing that is what's driving some people, makes it easier to be like, okay, I'm just gonna not worry about that. And there's certainly people who disagree and really want to have dialogue, and then it's actually really fun to engage with people who say, oh, I don't like how you said this because this, and it's like, oh, I want to learn more. Tell me more about that, because I can learn and I can do better and I can grow. But then the people, who have no interest in having a dialogue, then it's not worth any time or emotional bandwidth to worry about.
Yeah. No, and I've had a few of these conversations where I have actually offered people to buy coffee so that we can just sit down face to face and have a conversation about this, right? Rather than just carrying on mindlessly writing comments on Twitter. Why don't you come in? Let me buy you a coffee. Or, whenever I'm traveling to your town, I'll buy you a beer and we'll sit down and we'll talk about this. Let's not sort of throw it under the covers or something, but let's also not do it on Twitter, because right now everybody's kind of heated up, so it's better to have a conversation than in real life.
Twitter is where nuance goes to die, basically.
Absolutely, yes. I would not mind that on my headstone, actually. So okay, so there is one more thing that I would like your views about, and I think we are kind of running out of time, which is sort of related to the conversation. Do you think online networking is ever going to sort of replace, in large part, offline conversation, offline events, people talking face to face, coming together and sort of doing good things?
That's a really interesting question. And I mean, I hope not, right? I think that if we completely lose interpersonal interactions, if we lose in-person interactions, there's a lot of value to that. And then also there's a lot of value to even online interpersonal interactions, right? Like if we had this whole conversation as a Twitter thread back and forth, as opposed to being on Zoom and seeing each other's faces and being able to respond to each other, there's just something in us as people that needs that interpersonal connection, right? The social scientists all tell us that. So I think that to lose that completely would be a real shame. At the same time, I think that online networking can open up opportunities that aren't available in person. And so it can expand our opportunities. And so I think about things like the ability to attend a conference virtually that you couldn't go to in person. Or one of my favorite events is the RSC poster competition, right? It's the world's biggest scientific poster session, I think. And the ability to be able to interact with people all over the world and to see all of these different types of science, and for anyone who has the time to make a PDF of a poster to be able to then go online and interact with people about their science. I think that those are all really, really fantastic things that can supplement the other interactions that we have. So I think I would be really sad to see it replacing, but I do think that it can be an and, not an or. And thus we can kind of get the best out of both worlds. And I think especially for people, some people are much more comfortable interacting, online or through words versus in person, right? There's different personality types. As we think about neurodiversity, and people who have different ways of interacting with people, I think for some people that's can be a more inclusive way to interact, but I hope just stays part of the different types of interactions we have and never becomes the only thing that we do.
That's a good point. So on that note, Twitter not becoming the only mode of interaction that we ever have in our lives, I think we are almost right on time to end this session. Thank you so much, Jen, for waking up so early in the morning and joining the session online. And I'll just hand this over to Arushi and Karishma to take it forward.
Thank you so much, Manu, and thank you so much, Jen. This was a real social media extravaganza that we all had. And Manu, I have a special request. I'm waiting for a meme post this webinar on Twitter from you, especially on this webinar at least. But yeah, nonetheless, I personally had a very good time, and I'm sure everybody else also had a very good time here. And I want to thank again on behalf of everybody at India Bioscience and everybody else for taking out time throughout your busy schedules and helping us make this happen. And Karishma, if you could just share your screen again, we can announce our next Via Huddle, which is happening.
Yes, Arushi, right on that. Right on that. I think I got so carried away that I enjoyed it so much. Some of the points were so close to my own experiences on Twitter.
Yes.
That now I have to pull up the screen again. Okay. I'm so sorry about that, but here it is. This is next month. Are you seeing it, Arushi?
Yes, I can see it. And I hope everybody else can also see it. So we are going to have our next Via Huddle on the 20th of October. And again, two famous Twitter people are going to be present again on the Via Huddle. So I hope everybody registers again and we all see you again on the 20th of October.
Sounds very good. Thank you, Manu. Thank you, Jen. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you so much for all the questions. They kept the chat window very active, our participants. And I mean, we sort of dissected the whole Twitter space, and the takeaway was really nice. That it's valuable, but you don't have to ever think of relying solely on it. And you can also step away from it. I think that's something that we can keep in mind.
Yeah. Also a reminder to everybody that a feedback form has been posted in the chat box, and we'll be very happy if you could all fill it.
No trolling in the feedback. All right. Okay. Thank you. Have a good day, Jen. Rest of your day.
Thank
And
you
have a
so
good
much.
rest of the
You as
evening.
well. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Take
Thank you
care.
both.
All right. Bye,
And thanks to India
everyone.
Bioscience team. Thank you, Arushi. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Arushi, live streaming बंद कर सकते हैं?
I'll just do that.
Yeah, thank you, Rudra, saying very interesting and positive session. Thank you, Rudra.
Yeah, I've stopped the